Okay, good afternoon, everybody. So let's get right to it. One of the many national conversations that have been recently taking place in this country revolves around the idea of privilege. With some people being quite obviously more privileged than others, it's been cooking up resentment of late, leading many people in different circles to apologize for their privilege. But is privilege itself a negative thing? Should privilege be this dirty word, this badge of dishonor from which one should hide their face in shame? So let me state clearly from the beginning my position that it is important for one to appreciate the privileges one may be fortunate to have. And I think it's important for that awareness to lead one, therefore, to be more sensitive and more caring and more compassionate to those who are not as blessed. That said, I don't believe that as a rule one should apologize for one's privilege or feel guilty or ashamed for having it. On the contrary, privilege is exactly that. It's a privilege. It's good to be blessed. But at the same time, one should know that being worthy of one's privilege comes with strings attached. Which brings us to the question of the day. Are we as Jews, quote unquote, privileged? Is it fair and is it accurate to identify the Jews as a whole as a privileged people? And I think the answer is a resounding yes. We're absolutely privileged. And I don't think we should apologize for it. We should be proud of it. But when I say that Jews are privileged, I don't mean it in the way one may think. You see, generally when we use that term, when we hear the word privilege, what comes to mind? Invariably, it's things like receiving special treatment, a leg up, unique access to opportunities, special entree to institutions and to positions of influence. It often means getting special perks and breaks, people cutting you some slack and giving you the benefit of the doubt and the assumption of innocence. People of privilege can usually feel extra protected, safe, secure. By those definitions, where do you think we as Jews rank? Let's take a look. Let's think about this. Access and opportunity. You don't have to go back to pre-war Germany or Hungary to find discrimination and quotas being imposed upon Jews. In 1935, the dean at Yale University instructed his admissions committee never to admit more than 5 Jews. That was the quota, 5 Jews. Harvard's president wrote that too many Jewish students would ruin the college. As recently as the 1970s, Jews and blacks in America were denied entry into all sorts of clubs and associations, many having signs that said, no dogs, no colored, no Jews. So I'm not sure on that definition that many use for privilege that we would fit that criteria. Let's take a look at benefit of the doubt, assumption of innocence. I think we're all too familiar with the vile and preposterous libels and scandals and conspiracies that have been leveled against Jews through the ages. And there, too, you don't have to go back hundreds of years. Even today, Amazon continues to sell books that present Jewish blood libels as fact. After an earthquake struck Haiti in the year 2010, Israel sent one of the largest delegations of aid, and the first. They established a fully functioning hospital on the island in a matter of hours. A member of Britain's House of Lords demanded that an inquiry be set up for Israel to answer accusations that Israeli doctors were working in Haiti so that they can harvest the organs of local residents. So this is not 100 years ago blood libel. This is not 300 years ago. This is 2010. According to FBI data, Jews were more than twice as likely to be the victim of a hate crime than any other minority group in this country. How many college campuses are flooded by anti-Israel and anti-Jewish rhetoric and propaganda while drowning out any voice that seeks to counter such attacks? You ever see a speaker trying to get onto a college campus to speak at a pro-Israel talk? And the demonstrations that will take place outside those rooms? You ever see videos of Ben Shapiro trying to speak at a university? What takes place? I can go on and on about the subject, and that's not what this talk is about. Tonight at dinner, I'll be talking more about anti-Semitism. But for now, I'm only using this to bring a point, my point here, that the classic definition of privilege, of access and acceptance and safety and security, Jews are probably then the least privileged people on this planet. Certainly in the context of history, but even to an extent in recent times. So if that's the case, what did I mean when I opened by saying that Jews are privileged and that we should be proud of it? What privilege am I referring to? So I'll give you the Torah definition of privilege. True privilege is not about how others think of you or how others treat you. It's about how you think of yourself and how you treat others. True privilege is not about what someone else does or does not do for you. It's about what you do with what you have. Our sages tell us that God wanted to give the Jewish people merit. So he gave us Torah and mitzvos in abundance. God wanted us to be privileged. So what did he do? He entrusted us with the responsibility of living virtuous and righteous lives so that we may elevate and transform this world according to his vision. So no, Jewish privilege doesn't usually mean special access or opportunity or favors, but it does mean that we're called upon to set an example of living a meaningful life, of repairing this world in God's image, of being of service to others. It means rising above how others may treat us, to treat all human beings with dignity, with compassion, and with honor. Some 50 years ago, a Torah scholar by the name of Rabbi Yitzchak Hutner, who had a very close relationship with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, was featured as a speaker at a national convention of Jewish educators. And in his remarks, the rabbi told the esteemed gathering of principals and teachers from Jewish schools across the country that he could summarize the entire task that they had as educators of the next Jewish generation in 5 words. And he went on and said that the words are Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim, that God chose us from among all the nations. Teach your students what it means to be chosen, what responsibility they have as a chosen people. Your job of inspiring the Jewish future comes down to your ability to communicate this concept to the next generation. And if a child walks out of your yeshiva, out of your day school, with nothing else than knowing that they have a mission as God's chosen people, that they have a responsibility as God's chosen people, you have done your job. Now let's be clear. Privilege or chosen doesn't mean superior. It means having greater responsibilities. It was never meant for us to hoist ourselves up on a pedestal, but to feel humbly obligated to live more ethically, to act more charitably, and proclaim our faith more proudly, without any shame, without any embarrassment whatsoever. And notwithstanding the challenges of prejudice and discrimination that I referred to earlier, the fact is that most communities in the 21st century are blessed with material and social privileges, the likes of which our ancestors could not have dreamed of enjoying. In comparison to the past generations, The Jewish communities today have so much influence, have so much of the ability to take our chosenness and fulfill that mission. And we don't have to apologize, and we don't have to feel guilty, we don't have to feel insecure about that. We should be thankful and always remember that a Jew doesn't focus on his own entitlement. Rather, he constantly thinks of how his resources can be better used to promote goodness in the world. 2 years ago, there was a sports competition. This was a women's lacrosse team competition. And there was an Israeli team competing in this game, and it was taking place somewhere in Canada. And in their playoff game against Kenya's national team, Israel won handedly 13-4. But instead of rejoicing in this victory, the Israeli players left the game quite upset. And they were very disturbed. Why? Because they realized that they had an unfair advantage. While the Israeli players wore these state-of-the-art sports shoes with cleats, the Kenyan opponents wore plain gym shoes. It didn't have any cleats. And because the field was muddy, the players kept on falling. And they felt it was unfair. After the game, some of these young Israeli players called their parents to express how badly they felt about this game. Didn't feel fair. They couldn't run. The ground was muddy. One of the players' father, a man named Michael Dodavini, said it's worse than that because if they keep playing that way and they don't have cleats, they're going to do damage to their feet. And so that night, Dodavini calls the team coaches, the committee members, and some of the other parents, and they organized a collection to buy new shoes for the Kenyan players. And they asked the Kenyan coach for a list of all of their players and shoe sizes, but to please keep it quiet. And they literally needed to do this. They needed to call shoe suppliers with cleats to open up in the middle of the night so that they can get this collection there to Canada. And the very next day, the Israeli team, each and every single member of that team was carrying a gift bag and presented each one to another player from the opposite Kenyan team with this gift. A gift of shoes, the same shoes, types of shoes that the Israeli players had. The Israeli team did not seek any publicity. They didn't want it publicized. But the Kenyan team wanted it to be known to the world what their opponents of yesterday's game did for them. And they posted it on Twitter. And it went viral. Wearing their new cleats in their next game, Kenya went on to beat Belgium 16-9. And they tweeted, "One game in cleats today equals one win." And they added this line, "No one can help everyone, but everyone can help someone." The Israeli goalie, she wrote this. She said, 20 years from now, I won't remember that we won a game here. But for the rest of my life, I will remember the smile on the Kenyan players' faces when we gave them those gift bags. The great Hillel said, in a place where there is no leader, strive to be a leader. Each of us can make a difference wherever we are. Sometimes even in the smallest gesture, we can have such a huge impact on the lives of others in ways we could never imagine. That's our privilege. And we're proud of that privilege. We don't hide from that privilege. In the San Fernando Valley, there's a friend of mine, his name is Paul Cohn. Paul Cohn is a sports agent, and he represents many professional baseball players. And he's also an observant Jew. And he tells a story how a few years ago, one of his clients was a star pitcher by the name of Tim Hudson. Those of you who are baseball fans may remember his name. And Tim Hudson became a free agent. Now, you know, in free agency, that means that all teams start competing and start bidding And the agent is very busy getting all these bids in and picking the winning bid. He was a top-tier pitcher. He had more than 200 wins in his major league career, and he was in big demand. The signing date was approaching. Paul Cohn had 15 offers on the table. He narrowed it down to 4. It's Friday afternoon. It's a late November, which means Friday is coming in early. Negotiations now between the 4 are coming down to the wire. Candle lighting time was about 4:30. Well, while 2 of the general managers involved in the talks knew that Paul was an observant Jew, the other 2, who were newer, never dealt with Paul, they didn't know. There's a 3:30 conference call with the 4 general managers. Paul Cohn says, folks, some of you know, some of you don't, I keep Shabbat. Candle lighting is 4:30. I need to still take a shower. I need to get ready for Shabbat. 4 o'clock, this ends. The process ends based on what time candle lighting is. So make your best offers in the next 30 minutes, and by 4 o'clock, I'm going to pick the winning bid. Comes 3:58. Paul Cohn calls Bob Evans, GM, general manager of the San Francisco Giants. And he says, Bob, you got it. We're good to go. It's you. It's going to be the Giants. I'm going to let the other 3 teams know. And after Shabbat is over, we'll do the paperwork. But for now, it could be a verbal agreement between us. You got it. It's yours. Bob Evans is not familiar with this candle lighting time, Havdalah time, and he says, listen, I want to wrap it up. That usually means the signing of a contract. It'll take me just about an hour to get my lawyers here to write it up. And Paul says, no, candle lighting time. I don't do contracts then. You got my word. You can trust me. We'll take care of it Saturday night. He says, okay, so we won't do the phone thing, but I'll email it to you, and I'll take the email signature. You won't have to do anything. Just email it back. He says, no, you don't quite understand. Code of Jewish law doesn't allow for emails. Don't worry. We're good to go. Saturday night comes. Paul Cohn calls Bob Evans. They finalize the contract. Tim Hudson plays for the San Francisco Giants. 2 years go by. Hudson is now retiring. His last game is in San Francisco against the Los Angeles Dodgers. Paul Cohn is invited by the team owner to sit in the owner's booth for Tim Hudson's last game. The owner of the Giants is a Jew by the name of Larry Bayer. Larry Bayer comes over to Paul Cohn. You have a minute for me, Paul? Sure. Can we talk? Sure. You remember 2 years ago the Tim Hudson deal? Sure. Remember that candle lighting thing that was going on that Bob Evans was telling me about? Sure. So I want to tell you what happened. Bob Evans called me at 3:58 after he got the call from you, and he says, I don't know what this guy Paul's doing. He says he's got this candle lighting time. He can't work after candle lighting time. The contract, no email, no this, no that. And he said that we have his word. He said, I hung up from Bob Evans, and I called my wife. And I told my wife, it has been years since we had a Friday night Shabbat dinner. If Paul Cohn won't do a free agent deal worth millions of dollars because candle lighting is coming, we're going to have Shabbat dinner tonight. Call the whole family. Tell them when they come, I want them to leave their cell phones in their cars. No cell phones at the Shabbat table. We're going to have a Shabbat dinner in a traditional way, thanks to the inspiration of Paul Cohn. It's been 2 years. I have never gotten a chance to tell you, but you're here now in my booth. I want you to know, Paul, because of you, not only did we have a Shabbat dinner that week, but we continue this tradition of every once in a while getting the whole family together and having a beautiful Shabbat dinner. That's a beautiful thing. 6th inning comes. Once again, owner of the Giants comes over to Paul Cohn. Paul, you have a minute for my wife, Pamela? She wants to say a word to you. Sure. Pamela comes over. Paul, you remember the Tim Hudson deal? Yeah, I heard about a Shabbat dinner. She says, well, it doesn't just end with the Shabbat dinner. You see, a few years before that, my father had passed away. No one ever said Kaddish for him. And in his yard site, no one ever lit a candle for him. but hearing about your exchange with Bob Evans, which led to the Friday night dinner in my house, I made a resolution that night that from that point forward, every single year on my father's yahrzeit, I'm going to make sure it's honored, not just with the candle, but that someone says Kaddish for him. I wanted you to know, Paul, it's because of your phone call to Bob Evans that my father's now remembered. So we just do what we're supposed to do. And the world sees, and the world recognizes, and the world learns, and the world is inspired. You know, those of you that are baseball fans, perhaps you remember just a few short weeks ago was the Major League Baseball draft. And what was top of the news on this drafting was that 2 Orthodox kids were drafted by major league teams for the first time ever. We never had one. Now we had 2 in 1 year. Jacob Steinmetz drafted by the Diamondbacks, Eli Glitman by the Nationals. And what were they talking about on the news? How do you keep Shabbat if you're going to be a major league player? Well, one player said, well, because there's an Erev around the team, I could play. The other one said, no, I'm not even going to play on Shabbat. But if you're not going to, what if they're going to be in the World Series? What if this? No, you don't understand. Shabbat is Shabbat. Baseball is a career, but Shabbat is my life. And the news is talking about this idea of priorities in life. We do what we're supposed to do, and the world becomes inspired by it. So these days, when you hear the words, check your privilege, which I think is meant to put people in their place and deny them the right to speak on certain issues, check your privilege in that way, I say the opposite. Check our privilege, but not in the politically correct sense. Check your privilege and don't leave it behind. Be proud of it. Show it off. That's what we're meant to do with our privilege. We're meant to be as a chosen people to bring blessings to all the families of the face of the earth. So they need to know who we are. They need to know what it means. The Talmud relates a powerful story about Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest in the Holy Temple. And on one Yom Kippur, it says that Rabbi Yishmael goes into the temple's innermost chambers, the Holy of Holies, the place where only the Kohen Gadol can go, and only once a year. And we're told that while there he had a vision. And he saw the angel Kasriel sitting before God. And God is speaking in this vision to Rabbi Yishmael. And what does God say to Rabbi Yishmael? He says, it's Yom Kippur. Can you bless me? God is asking Rabbi Yishmael to give him a blessing. Imagine that. Imagine God asked you to bless him. What are you going to bless him with? May God give you. So what did Rabbi Yishmael say? He blessed God that whatever anger or displeasure you may be feeling towards your children, may it be washed away and overtaken by your overwhelming love for them. That's what he blessed him with. Instead of voicing demands and expectations, what is it that God on the holiest day and the holiest of places asks for? He asks for a blessing from us. So that Rabbi Yishmael complies, blessing God to deal mercifully and compassionately with his children. Because in the end, what does God want more than anything else? He wants us to be close to him. So that being the case, a year ago about this time, I found myself very confused. Because here we are, we're trying to figure out how to hold high holiday services in the midst of a pandemic shutdown. Government agencies laid out all sorts of restrictions with regard to communal prayer. The halachic authorities were weighing in. Mandates, lockdowns, masks, social distancing. You have to move your services from the hotel ballroom. You got to build a tent. Where we're going to put the tent. How we're going to fit people in the tent. I remember wondering to myself and speaking to God, what do you want from us? I mean, here it is. We're trying to inspire lots of people to pray to you on Rosh Hashanah because that's what you want us to do. We're doing what you asked us to do. And yet you're throwing restriction after restriction our way with this pandemic. What do you want from us? I remember we had discussions. I was having a state senator that's a friend of mine in the governor's office speaking to the governor about how we're supposed to do this and what way will the governor allow it to happen. We went from a plan A, which changed to a plan B, which changed to a plan C, it just continued to change as government changed with us. The county came up with new regulations. We needed to publicize new regulations. And so while all the other temples just basically shut down, we ended up doing a 6 a.m. short service, a 7 a.m. short service, an 8 o'clock service. I mean, we just kept on doing so that with social distancing, we can get in as many people socially distant and just do shorter shifts of davening. And then we did chauffeurs blowing in parks all around the Conejo Valley, just finding any possible way. And what I found was, the response to my question was, that what I witnessed in the Jewish community during last year's high holidays was perhaps the greatest resolve I've ever seen amongst Jews to want to participate on some level. It's interesting that Jews that never came to high holidays when it was in a regular, comfortable hotel room found a way to be at a park. Yes, they're 57 feet away wearing 17 masks, but they needed to be there. It brought out something within the Jew, this resolve, this devotion, this determination. Because for us, connecting to God is not something we do out of sense of obligation or nostalgia or tradition. It's privilege. And something touched this nerve within the Jew last year of, I'm going to find a way. I'm going to find a way. Whatever the challenges, we will not be denied. Will not be denied this expression of our deep bond and connection to God. That's who we are. And that's who we've been, by the way, ever since God chose Abraham. We've always been the same. And there's a powerful statement that we say in our prayers. We say it on Mondays and Thursdays after referencing some of the trials and tribulations that we've endured throughout the millennia. We declare, Uvechol zois, shimcha lo yishachachnu. Despite all this, despite everything we've been through, God, we haven't forgotten your name. No tishkachenu. So God, we didn't forget your name. Don't forget ours. I think as a Jewish community, we're able to say that prayer after last year's Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, how we found every possible way to connect, even when the world was in total chaos, yet we found a way to hear the shofar. No tishkachenu. God, we didn't forget you. Don't forget us. This relationship with God, especially as we come to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur time, is best expressed by the prayer of Avinu Malkeinu. What does Avinu mean? Our Father. What does Malkeinu mean? Our King. There's a dual relationship here. God is our King, but God is also our Father. There's two relationships of the Jew. There is the Torah, there's the covenant, and then there's the relationship of a parent. Avinu Malkeinu. Yes, we coronate God as our King on Rosh Hashanah, but we also appeal to Him as our Father in heaven. There was a survivor who passed away last year at the age of 94. And during his Shiva, his children and grandchildren shared an amazing story about him, a very difficult story. It was a story about their father and grandfather's mother. And it sent chills down the spines of everyone that was at that Shiva house to hear this. Because it best described this idea of Avinu, God is our Father. Because we're always left with that question, if God is our Father, then why? And every one of us can finish that sentence. Why do you go through difficulties? Why do people suffer? If God is our Father, if God loves us, we can all make that checklist. That's a difficult question. And so much of our prayers of Avinu Malkeinu, yes, you're the king, but you're also our father, and therefore I'm begging you, I'm imploring you, please, as my tati, as my mommy. So listen to this story, and it will make you a bit uncomfortable. I prepare you for that. He and his mother were on the train, the cattle car, to Auschwitz together. They arrived at the platform and were forced onto a selection line to face the infamous Dr. Mengele. Seeing the woman, who looked much older than her years, Mengele immediately sent her to the left, which meant she was heading right to the gas chambers. Her son, who looked older and stronger than his real age, was sent to the right, which meant he was going to live. But the son saw his mom sent to the left, and this young boy ran to the left to be with his mother. His mother understood very quickly what the left and what the right meant. Seeing all the old people getting sent to one line, she knew what that line meant. Seeing the younger, stronger people sent to the right, she knew what that meant. They were going to be used in their labor camp. The rest of us here on the left, we're going to die. And here is her son clinging to her. I don't want to let you go, Mom. I don't want to be alone. I want to be with you. And she starts pleading with him, no, Tatalu, please, go there, go to the other line, go to the other line. No, I'm not going to the other line. I'm begging you, go to the other line. Mom, I'm not leaving you. I'm not letting go of you. And the family is telling this over at this home of Shiva. And they say, our father's mother took her son and slapped him in the face and said, son, you're going to listen to me? Go to the right now. And the son shook and ran to the right. And that was the last time he ever saw his mother. That slap was the greatest possible love that she could have shown her son at that moment. That slap allowed him to live, allowed him to have children, allowed him to have grandchildren and great-grandchildren. But how much pain did that slap cause the mother, knowing that the last time she would ever see her son would be having to slap him. The irony, the paradox, the struggle. To set aside one's personal hesitations and difficulties, to do what's ultimately best for one child is the height of parental love. And so we wonder, if God loves us so much, why do we often feel so smacked? If God loves his chosen people so much, why have we gone through what we have gone through? If God loves us so much, why in our individual lives do we find ourselves so often struggling? Well, years ago at a Farbrengen, at a Hasidic gathering, the Lubavitcher Rebbe addressed this subject, the subject of human suffering. I was a young kid. I remember sitting by this Farbrengen. I remember hearing the Rebbe speak, and the Rebbe broke down. And the Rebbe started crying. And the Rebbe was all choked up. It was hard for him to get the words out when he was speaking about the suffering of the Jewish people. And I remember the Rebbe saying, if God can do it all, why not just provide the goodness and the sweetness without the pain? And if the Torah has all the answers, why doesn't it give us the answer to this question? Even Moses pleads with God, God, why do you deal with such evil to your people? And there could be only one explanation, the Rebbe said. That God wanted us to know, because if we knew the reasons, if God revealed to us the reason, that we would then be okay with the status quo. We would make peace with the pain. We would go about our lives just fine with the world staying exactly as the way it is. And God does not want us to accept things as they are. God wants us to hope and to pray and to yearn and to fight for better, for good, to make the world a better place. He wants us to question and to challenge and to fight and ultimately to emerge stronger and better and more resilient and more faithful than before. In his parting speech to us, in this week's portion, Moses says in effect, "Dear children, when God tried to speak directly to your parents at Mount Sinai, they trembled with fear and they were overwhelmed. They said, if we hear any more directly from God, we will surely die. So God provided ways for you to meet him without being overwhelmed. Yes, God is the creator. He's the supreme power. He's the first cause. He's the mover of the planets and the stars. But remember that he's also your parent. He's your partner. He's your beloved. He's your friend. He is the Shekhinah, which comes from the word shachen, meaning your neighbor. He's right there next to you. So thank him every morning for the gift of life. And say the Shema twice a day for the gift of love. And join your voice in prayers for the spirit that he gives you, for the strength that he gives you, and the courage that he gives you to change the world. His Torah is not in heavens. His Torah is not beyond the sea. The beauty of Jewish spirituality is that you don't have to climb tall mountains or even to enter large sanctuaries to experience it. You can put up a makeshift canvas tent in a parking lot in 100-degree weather and make the most beautiful minyan that God has ever heard. You find a way to reach God with what we have. So there's a pandemic, we found a way. You have to daven outdoors, we found a way. You're going through difficulties, you find the way. You reach out to him. We find that Shekhinah, that divine presence, at our Shabbos table, in the glow of the candles, in the smell, the aroma of the challah, in the singing of the Shalom Aleichem. In Judaism, God is close. God is there in the poetry of the words of the Psalms. He is there listening to our discussions as we study the pages of the Torah and the Talmud. He's there as we wrap our fingers and our hands with the straps of the tefillin. He's there with us. He's there in the joy of the festivals. He's there in the very air of the land of Israel, and he's there in the stones of Jerusalem. And if you cannot see him, it's only because you're looking in the wrong direction. When he seems absent, he's actually there just beside you. You just have to turn your head to see him. And he loves you, and he believes in you, and he wants your success. He is the voice you can hear in the silence of your soul. He is the light you see when you open your eyes to wonder. He is the hand you touch when you're in the pit of despair. And he is the breath that keeps you alive. And my friends, we are indeed privileged. But we understand that privilege is not a luxury. That privilege is a legacy. Like our parents and grandparents before us, we should be proud of our Jewish privilege, as we hope and pray that our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren will be proud of theirs. With the approach of the high holidays coming rather early this year, during which we'll be reciting the Yizkor prayer on Yom Kippur, remembering the souls of our dearly departed loved ones, let us appreciate that we are here because of their sacrifice, because of the sacrifice of those that came before us, because in the most difficult of times, they knew their privilege, and they were proud of that privilege, and they never gave it up. You see, our lives are not disconnected fragments. We're each a letter in God's book of life. And although single letters are each themselves limited in meaning, When they stand alone, they have true meaning when they're joined with other letters to make up words. And then when we take these words and we put them together and we make a sentence. And we take the sentence and we make a paragraph. And we put these paragraphs together and we create a story. That's who we are. We're part of the oldest, most incredible story ever written. The story of a tiny people, never large, often homeless, who outlived the greatest empires the world has ever known. From the Egyptians to the Babylonians to the Greeks to the Romans, all the way to the Third Reich and the Soviet Union. Each thought themselves immortal, and each has gone. But Am Yisrael Chai, the Jewish people, still lives. We defeat death not by living forever, but by living with values that live forever. By doing deeds and creating blessings that live on after us, and by attaching ourselves in the midst of time to God who lives beyond time. I'd like to conclude with one final story. The year was 1939. There was a Hasidic Rebbe known as the Stetchener Rebbe. The Stetchener Rebbe and his followers were trying to escape the Germans' advance across Poland. They ended up in a city called Kolbasov. It bought them a little bit of time, but they soon learned that the Germans were closing in on that town as well. The Rebbe and his Hasidim, they were trapped. It was a Shabbos. It was a Saturday when the Nazis, Yamach Shemam, entered Kolbasov. The Rebbe and his followers were in the middle of the Shabbat meal when they heard the trucks rumbling and they heard the dogs barking in the distance. Some of the women and the children began to whimper, but the Rebbe, the Chechener Rebbe, said, retaining his serenity and composure, he told them, be strong, be courageous, have emunah, have faith. The Hasidim discussed amongst themselves that while in the presence of the Nazis, Yamach Shemam, they needed to be careful not to accord their Rebbe any special reverence or respect, lest the monsters deduce who he is. And in their sick obsession to cause pain to Jews, they would find out who their Rebbe was, who their rabbi was, and they would torture him in the presence of others and make them watch. So let's not give any hint who the Rebbe is. Don't stare at him. Don't help him. Soon the sounds were close. Raus, raus, out of the house, everybody shouted, the Nazi soldiers, demanding everyone come out. The poor, frightened families emerged from their small houses, all ordered to the center of town. And once in the center square, they were told that they needed to stay quiet, and each one needed to lift their arms up in the air. And they needed to keep them up. Anyone who put their hands down would be shot on the spot. This was again part of the Nazis' sick obsession with bringing pain, with bringing humiliation, with toying with the Jews. All was silent in the square. No one dared make a sound. The Hasidim and the family members of the Rebbe were careful not to stare at the Rebbe, but they would steal this occasional glance to see how he's handling keeping his hands up. 10 minutes go by, 20 minutes go by, 30 minutes go by. Try keeping your hands up straight the entire time. He's an elderly man, and you begin to see slowly his hands are weakening. They don't know what to do. If they run to help him, they give it away, and that will cause him death. If they let his hands fall, that will cause him death. Suddenly, from across the plaza, this young girl steps forward, and she walks directly to the Rebbe, and the crowd is watching in silence. Even the Nazi soldiers stop to see, what does this girl think she's doing? Is she stupid? Did she want to get herself killed? She comes right to the Rebbe. The elderly holy man looks down and sees this little girl. It was none other than his granddaughter. She looks up at her Zaidi. She reaches up for his hands, and she says, "It's okay, Zaidi. You can rest your hands now. I'm going to hold them up for you." As if he was finally able to lower a load of bricks, the Rebbe releases his hands and they settle into the arms of his brave granddaughter. The officer in charge decides to let the girl do it. Why? Because there's no way she's going to be able to keep up. This is really going to be fun watching this. And he warns her, now if your hands falter, you will get shot with the old man. But the girl didn't tire. She didn't flinch. As if she had somewhere this otherworldly force, she continued to hold up her dear Zaidi's hands the entire time. The entire crowd stood staring in awe, in silent prayer. And when any of them felt that they were on the verge of their hands lowering, all they did was they stared at this little girl, and they gained strength from her, and they kept their hands up the entire time. This torturous, pointless charade went on for hours until the sun began to set. Everyone watched and waited. The little girl continued to hold up her grandpa's hands. And light turned into darkness, and the nighttime air grew colder, and miraculously the hands remained up. This was still the days before the deportations to camps, and most Nazi actions against Jews at that point were designed just to intimidate and to control and to mock, though they wouldn't hesitate to shoot if they had the excuse to. Here it was just to bring mockery to them. And when the hour grew late, the officer in command gave his order for everyone to go back to their homes. With dignity and pride, the Rebbe walked back home surrounded by his Hasidim and this incredible girl who restored their courage and their faith. Those who witnessed what took place that day and lived to tell the story, they would say that the incident reminded them of the biblical account of Moses sitting atop a rock with his hands raised towards heavens as the Jewish people were battling the Amalekans. And as long as Moses' hands were raised, Israel was victorious in battle. And when Moses' arms tired and his arms were falling, they would be losing in battle. And so Moses' brother and his nephew climbed to the peak, and each one held Moses' hands up high so that the Jewish people were victorious in battle. The survivors of Kol B'Sav always believed that they witnessed a miracle that day. Moreover, they saw an awesome sign from above saying that future generations stood ready to hold up the torch of Yiddishkeit, that is the legacy of their grandparents. And so we will live on and we will survive. Indeed, that brave girl who held the hands of the Stetchener Rebbe high that day would go on to become the matriarch of a great Hasidic dynasty that continues to thrive until this day. Despite all this, we have not forgotten your name, dear God. Na tishkachenu, we beg you, dear God. Don't forget us. May the Almighty grant us the courage and the foresight to continue carrying that torch high, to continue wearing our privilege proudly, seeing to pass this legacy to our children and to our grandchildren who are the guarantors of our future. And may God grant us the strength and the perseverance to rise above the difficulties we and the entire world are facing, so that we may celebrate the bond of love that lends meaning and purpose to our lives, in good health, with peace of mind, with nachas, with prosperity and blessings, for all of our families, for all of Israel, and for all of mankind. Thank you very much.